All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining Cyrisma and OrbitalFire today for our webinar about small business cybersecurity. It's all about the data, and we're going to learn a lot more about that today. As we go, we really want to get your questions. Feel free to put them in the chat. We'll probably hold them till the end. But we'll make sure we get to certainly all, if not as many as we possibly can before that. And we didn't announce this earlier, we're going to surprise you, or I'm going to surprise you now, but we're going to have a little bit of a giveaway for everybody that's taken the time to attend today, and we'll be announcing the winner of that afterward. And again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And with that, Reg, I want to introduce both of the panelists today, the speakers. Reg Harnish is CEO of OrbitalFire and is really a sought-after thought leader and expert on cybersecurity. I'm sure you've seen, he has a very active LinkedIn conversation often about the importance of cybersecurity that I highly recommend everybody following. Prior to OrbitalFire, Reg was also the founder and former CEO of Greycastle Security, a former executive vice president at the Center for Internet Security, and the former CTO of Autotask. And we are very lucky to have with us today Liam Downward, CEO of Cyrisma, who also has 20 years of experience within the cybersecurity industry as an expert that we look forward to listening to as well. So with that, Reg, why don't you get started?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Appreciate the warm introduction. Can everyone see my screen?
If you can't, raise your hand and we'll work on it, but I think we're good.
I missed our beautiful photos here. Okay, let's just get started. And one of the areas of cybersecurity that continues to vex me is these statistics. We have real problems, especially at the lower end of the market, collecting data from small businesses, medium businesses around what's going on regarding cybersecurity. But a few of the ones that are out of ConnectWise most recently really spell out and tell the story of the challenges that small businesses are really having in cybersecurity. I would say even well beyond these statistics, which everyone probably recognizes and generally agrees to, even if the numbers aren't perfect, is that cybersecurity is increasingly getting in the way of small businesses doing what they are familiar with. And that comes in a couple of different flavors. One is selling their product. So increasingly, small businesses are challenged with selling their product because in the sales process, their prospects, their leads are asking more questions about cybersecurity. And particularly if you're in highly regulated or enforced areas of cybersecurity, places like the DoD supply chain, for example. So that's one. They can't really sell their product without thinking about cybersecurity. The second is insurance, which has really become the Wild West and has created issues for the smallest of businesses, largely because 5 years ago, if there was an insurance application, they could just say yes, 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 yes. No one would really check up on that. No one really understood the questions or the answers. But today it's different days. And those applications, one, are oftentimes being verified by the broker, underwriter, carrier. But then probably more importantly is if there is an incident and a claim, before there's any conversation about paying a claim, there's going to be some review and scrutiny on the program and those specific controls. They want to see that they were active, effective, exactly what you said they were when you applied for the policy. So cyber insurance is another area. But increasingly, we are seeing the supply chains develop an annual or a regular and recurring process of managing third-party and vendor risk. Supply chain cybersecurity is a big story. And whether it's Target or the most recent big one, I think it was Nissan, the small businesses that make up the supply chain. So, right, who's connected to big businesses? It's all small businesses. And they are definitely doing a better job of enforcing the different standards and frameworks, pushing those things down to the smallest entities in their supply chain. So questionnaires are just stacking up. And I can tell you that that's a regular and frequent request for support from OrbitalFire is small business gets a questionnaire from a big business and they don't know how to answer that. So it's getting in the way of keeping their existing customers. And then, of course, the obvious stuff, which is whether it's New York State DFS, CMMC, and DFARS, these regulatory mandates continue to evolve, and they are confusing, especially if you don't have experts or the time to learn. Again, small businesses just don't have the same resources. That story has been told a million times. So what is the problem? The way I describe it, and really what I've become passionate about, and certainly the mission here at OrbitalFire, is making cybersecurity accessible to small organizations. And that means a couple of things. One is, of course, it's got to be affordable. That seems obvious. The second pieces, though, are that it needs to be understandable. If we want involvement and commitment and continuous improvement from these smaller organizations, they need to make their own informed decisions. We as security purists, we can talk all day about they should be doing multi-factor and encrypting, and they should have policy, and they should have an incident response plan. But honestly, where these are human beings, and where we get the best commitment from small businesses is when they're involved in the decision-making process. And that requires some data, some education. So a big part of making cybersecurity accessible is translating these complex problems and these complex solutions into terms and language that they can understand, and then subsequently make an informed decision about. Well, the third and probably the hardest part of accessibility is scaling down the NIST 53 or the ISO 27K or any of these things that all of us understand, but scaling them down to a point where they really make sense to a small business. Where they're relevant. You know, a 22-person manufacturer of ball bearings is never going to comply with the NIST 53 and all 1,100 controls. They're just not. Here's the good news, though, is that they don't need to. They don't have the same level, depth, severity, complexity, sophistication of cyber risks. And so if we're doing a good job translating, if we're doing a good job making it affordable, and then making it relevant to them, that's how we make cyber accessible to smaller organizations. That's sort of the mission here and what we believe. Now, before we get into a few of these specific services that we consider fundamental to small business cybersecurity, and Liam and I will go into that, let's kind of set a groundwork here for the definition, because in cybersecurity, we really don't care about iPhones and firewalls or OneDrive. What we care about is risks to data. And that comes in really a couple of different forms. And without getting too nerdy here, confidentiality, important, right? Keeping secrets where they should be secret, or making sure that we have controlled access to certain data. Integrity, meaning is it free of unauthorized changes? Or is it in the condition that we expect it to be in, the way we left it? So integrity, is it what it says it is? And then availability, of course, is it there when we need it? Is it where we left it? Those kinds of things. So we're really sort of trying to simplify to some degree the super complexity of cybersecurity and risk management down to doing these things around data. And that could be health records. It could be, blueprints for, titanium ball bearings. It could be your product roadmap for 2023. It could be a lot of things, but this is what cybersecurity is. And when you think about your program and your investments, this is what you should be doing with those. I'm going to finish up my pitch here and talk a little bit about the where and how. Cybersecurity can be confusing, of course. We are all aware of that. The magic formula that we have brought to our customers, though, and where Cyrisma and the services that Cyrisma enables for us have really become really fundamental, is this concept of this triad here. So for small organizations, for really any organization, you've really got three places to look when you are making the decision of where do I start, what order do I do these things in, and how much of it do I do? It's three places. One is what you should do. This typically comes from a risk assessment and provides amazing detail and amazing prescription to risk and risk treatment, the priorities. And a lot of times it's based on volume. And so it's a very precise and a very accurate way to build your cybersecurity program. The problem with doing a risk assessment is that it's nearly impossible, especially for small organizations, to truly understand threats and vulnerability pairs and replacement value on data assets and all sorts of other things, compensations. It's very difficult to do. Even experts in risk assessments struggle to do really good risk assessments that are relevant and accurate and complete. The second option is what you must do. And this comes, of course, from your contractual requirements, your regulatory requirements, could be legal requirements. And the beauty of this is that it's very prescriptive. You know exactly step by step and almost in a binary fashion, what do I need to do in cybersecurity to ensure that cybersecurity doesn't get in the way of my business? The problem with compliance-based security, of course, and everyone here is going to agree, that compliance does not necessarily equal security. And you can check a lot of different boxes and not be any more secure. And then the last consideration is what we call capability. What can I do? So whether it's something that you are familiar with or have the resources for or the expertise, something that you've been doing, year over year for a long time, it's sort of got some muscle memory. The advantage here is that there's momentum and there's less friction between starting and getting started. And so we love capability, particularly at the low end of the market with small businesses. The problem with this is that low-hanging fruit are usually just that, low-hanging fruit, and they may have no meaningful impact on your risk as an organization. But if you Venn diagram this out, the center, if you're thinking about risk, if you're thinking about your regulatory and contractual requirements, and if you're thinking about, well, what is actually feasible for my organization, there's a real sweet spot in the middle. And for OrbitalFire, and certainly we value our partnership with Cyrisma, Liam will talk about some of these services. They all fall in this sweet spot. One, because Cyrisma has made it accessible for us and thusly our customers. Secondly, that the areas of cybersecurity that we provide services in, or these areas that we focus on, are oftentimes some of the highest risk areas. But then three, it's one of the easiest things for us to do, honestly. And there's a lot of visibility to it, a lot of demand for it. So I'm teeing Liam up here, and I'm going to turn it over to him. But that really the sweet spot here is where we see all of these things coming together to provide value and risk management to smaller organizations. So Liam?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks very much, Reg. Well, I just want to kind of add something to that, Reg. And I think that's a good Venn diagram that you put in there because it simplifies stuff. I'll put my auditor hat on. And one of the things that we were taught as an auditor was what we say and what we do and what we have in practice needs to be all in alignment. Because if it isn't, then we actually have gaps. And that kind of follows under that same suit from an outside looking in. And then when you're looking in, because those things I just talked about and Reg is going to be a key thing that we talk about when we're looking at additional areas of the cybersecurity fundamentals. But I thought that was actually a very interesting take on it, Reg. So I appreciate that. So let's look at it from a data perspective. Everybody's used to the defense and depth strategy, right? What we look at from a Cyrisma standpoint and with OrbitalFire is that we look from within, and that is we look from the inside out perspective. And the first thing that we want people to do is, do you know what data you have? Right? Could be intellectual property, could be sensitive data on employees, customers, could be marketing material. But how important is it to your organization, right? Because that's a key thing, because if you don't know how important it is, then pretty much then anybody will do whatever they want with that data. So how do you actually manage that? And we'll get into more detail about that later. The next is to say, if we move from the data and work outwards, we say, okay, what if those systems that house that data, are they vulnerable? And can we actually identify and remediate those vulnerabilities on those systems that house that data? That's a key thing, because bad actors are always looking ways of getting in and getting access to your data. Now, when we go to the next step is to say that, okay, what about the configuration of those systems? Are we hardening them and using industry best practices? Because what they say is that if you know where your data is and you reduce your data sensitivity footprint, you reduce your vulnerability landscape, and you implement secure configuration standards, you can reduce your threat landscape by up to 60+%, which is huge by just following 3 simple methods. But let's just deconstruct that and let's break that down into each individual element, right? So now let's focus on the data at hand, right? The next thing is data is basically the new oil spill. It's everywhere, right? We can't assume that we have data in the cloud, and it's because everybody's moving to the cloud. We used to have a lot of on-prem stuff, but we're moving to the cloud. But we can't assume because it's in the cloud, it's secure. We're only human. We're always going to find the path of least resistance and make it easy for ourselves. And that is to actually download data, put it onto systems that we can actually manage ourselves. And now all of a sudden, you've got multiple areas where data is and where it's located, and it's hard to maintain that. And the problem is because we're only human. We always have that issue between the chair and the keyboard is always going to get in the way of cybersecurity becomes successful. But we need to make sure that we actually have a catch-all scenario. So how do we do that in a catch-all scenario? And well, that comes down to 2 things, right? Number 1 is that we need to actually implement based on principles. So we must know what data do we have, where is it located, and who has access to that data. And the reason being is because if we don't understand those principles, then how do we secure that data and have it where it's a need to know basis? We have the right permissions in place. If we have data that's no longer needed, let's remove it. If we have data that is deemed to be secure, make sure we have it in the location where it needs to be. So we start reducing the footprint and the multiple copies of different types of data. And it makes it easier from a security standpoint when identifying vulnerabilities, secure configuration, if we have that less footprint of different systems housing different data. But as we move into the next step is that the problem we have is we don't know the value of our data. Unfortunately, the bad actors actually know more about our data than we actually do. And the reason being is because they have a lot of data they've siphoned out through ransomware, through hacks, all that kind of stuff. So they kind of look at an industry and kind of guess what they're at. But when they get in, they know exactly. So you've seen situations where ransomware may not give you a dollar amount because they're siphoning off data and they're basically putting a cost associated to that data. But let's stay ahead of the game. We need to make sure that we understand the dollar and cents of our data. But also to be proactive instead of reactive, let's monitor the dark web because we don't know if our data is out there. 1, have we had compromised accounts? 2 is that are we being talked about on forums where they've actually got some information about our network and they want to know how to compromise it and they're asking other people in dark web to help them. Have they siphoned off information that they're looking to quick sell and get off there and in different marketplaces? And are they actually, have they hit us with ransomware, whether that's through compromised accounts and everything else? We need to constantly monitor that so we know exactly what needs to be done to remove the potential next step of threat of hitting our brand, making sure there's not a lot of data out there, but reducing that risk because we constantly need to monitor that. But when we go into that setting is that now we're in the vulnerability stage, right? We now know where systems are housing sensitive data. We need to make sure that we're constantly scanning those systems and making sure that we understand the vulnerabilities of those systems. And so we can actually assign a mitigation task to reduce those risks. It's not about, oh, do we have vulnerabilities that have exploits out there? It's about following a standard saying if we've got critical vulnerabilities, we need to mitigate them. Medium, doesn't matter if they're exploitable or not, we need to make sure we clearly define that and actually mitigate those in a timely manner that's required by industry best practices and corporate law or federal requirements. We all know that, you know, we look at NIST 800-53, CMMC, PCI, they all ask about system hardening. We need to make sure we put that in place, whether that's at the operating system level, if it's at IIS, if we're housing websites, or if we're looking at databases. The better we can secure those systems, the less footprint it has of being potentially compromised and at getting access to that data that's being deemed as sensitive. And we need to remediate as soon as possible when we identify systems that are out of scope or there's drift configurations, because administrators will make changes, on the fly, but never go back and fix them. But there's never a ticket to see that there was a change management process. So we need to have this catch-all to pick it up so we can kind of move it in the right direction of enhancing the security posture of the client. But effective mitigation as we go forward. Reg talked about integrity and availability, but not just, confidentiality, but we need to bring accountability into it. So it's basically taking that the triad itself of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We need to assign accountability. And how do we do that? Not only within IT infrastructure, IT departments, within MSPs, or even to the end user itself. We need to be able to track vulnerabilities and out to the actual IT people on security to make sure that they've been assigned to mitigate that, so we can effectively show from a GRC or risk management that we are actually identifying risks and mitigating them. But when it comes to data sensitivity, the biggest thing is that IT will take on the responsibility to try and clear up that data, but then they'll end up having a phone conversation with the person that's the data owner and become a nuisance. Well, why don't you assign the accountability to that data owner for them to clean it up? Because once they're aware of that sensitive data, they will then be held accountable. Now you'll be able to track and monitor mitigation efforts, which then you can then show to leadership of the path that you're taking, of what you've done in the past, what you've done today, and what you need to do in the future to enhance that security posture when it comes around that data, making sure it's secure 24/7. So then when we look at that from a data scanning perspective, we need to make sure that we know where potential data points are. We have Office 365, you've got Google Workspace, and other types of cloud, such as Box.net, Dropbox, and S3 buckets, etc. Then we have local storage, whether it's the actual, your C drive, your D drive, or a USB drive, or even to UNC paths that are on the network itself. We need to make sure that we're scanning that and understanding where the potential sensitive data is stored, so we can then create that remediation path or project to clean it up and have it in locations. Because if we don't know, then the bad actor is going to take advantage of that because we don't know where that data is. And even from an IR perspective, if there is ever a situation where there's been a breach or a compromise, especially if an email account is being compromised because of account takeover, at least now you're aware of what type of sensitive data is actually housed in email accounts. So you can either know to declare or go through a process of how do we clean that up, and so we don't have that happen again, or if they did have access to it. You got vulnerability scanning, where we need to make sure that we're scanning sensitive data containers, which could be different elements such as Kubernetes to Apache from a web app standpoint, even from storage servers, anything that we can, and even with web applications itself, is to be able to make sure not only are we actually scanning sensitive data containers, but making sure that web applications are actually developed correctly. They're not there with SQL injection, cross-site scripting, because these are the things that are very easily can be hacked into, especially when you have constituents or your clients connecting to an external website, whether it's static or dynamic, or even if it's a login, is to make sure that they don't inject any type of malicious code to your clients, because we call that the "while you were here" virus. You're the last person they went to, they're going to blame you, but you need to make sure it's clean. You got secure configuration, but not only looking at local systems, but now you can start engaging into the cloud and making sure, like with Azure, you've got Microsoft Secure Score. You've also got CIS benchmarks with different types of standards to implement with AWS and Google to start locking down and making sure that you have good security practices around those elements. But the key thing is making sure that you know where you are in a configuration standard, so then you can put the path forward to actually mitigate those risks, or engage in an organization such as OrbitalFire or somebody else to help you to maintain that level of security, because you may not have the resources available to you to be able to mitigate these risks. But always weigh up your options of how you can look at securing your environment. And if you have resource constraints, always look out. It's ask for help. And it's rather than having ignorance is bliss, because sometimes if you don't see it, it's not going to happen. It will happen. It's a matter of when, not of when it's going to happen if you don't pay attention to your risks.
One of the reasons we love Cyrisma as a partner is not only that it gives us some tech to enable these kinds of critical services to our customers, but really organizationally, we are aligned on a few concepts. One is, again, this idea of accessibility and making it fast, easy, and affordable for small businesses to benefit from these tools. We've all worked with cybersecurity products or heard about, heard the stories about these massive, complex, super awesome technologies that take, 9 months to deploy, a year and a half to see any return on if they actually get off the ground. They require armies of people to maintain, and they're very expensive. And with Cyrisma, we have a partner who really solves all of those problems for us. And that gives us the ability to solve those same exact problems. And whether it's identifying sensitive data, healthcare records, credit card numbers, could be anything, or, identifying vulnerabilities in those containers, or of course, human and otherwise made configuration issues, which are so critical to a lot of the risk management that we're providing to our customers, and really across every market segment and industry. They really apply the same, and they get a lot of attention. Things like vulnerability scanning, all of us have heard of, whether you are in cybersecurity or you're not. It's just a very common element and practice that just gets a lot of attention, whether it's talking about, the latest breach report, or it's a best practice from NIST. Vulnerability scanning is always near the top of the list, and we're doing a lot of that for our customers. So we appreciate the partnership for their attention and really sensitivity to accessibility for small businesses. And so that's really worked out for us. Cyrisma has been a partner of ours since OrbitalFire has been born, and we're proud of that. And we love working with them, but also we love the results that our customers are seeing from this platform. So we're going to jump into a couple of facts here, but if you've got questions, please either Q&A or chat, throw them in there, and we'll get to them next. We're going to provide you some actionable advice after we answer a few of these, but these are things that we're seeing, and I know Liam is chomping at the bit to answer this question, so I'm going to let him take this one, but I'll chime in after that.
Sure. So what if my data is in the cloud? All right. So like I said earlier, is depending on where it is in the cloud, you need to know it. Is it box.net? Is it Dropbox? Is it S3 buckets? Those kind of things. Well, first thing you want to make sure is the data actually encrypted? And is it encrypted in the actual container? No S3 buckets now with Amazon is going to have encryption. Second of all is making sure that you actually have the default configuration standards around cybersecurity is enabled. Who has access to it? Make sure it's not wide open, because people have made mistakes around S3 buckets where they've left it open and people have given up free information when it's not supposed to. But reality-wise is that lock it down to where you want your data to be stored. Don't allow it for where you allow your end users to store data anywhere. Make sure you, as a discussion, make this decision as a group to make sure these are the areas that we're going to support from a cloud perspective, and make sure you implement that, and make sure that any other solution gets automatically blocked or removed based on whitelist, blocklist kind of scenario. And make sure you do that, because cloud can be your savior, but also can be a bane of your existence if you don't manage it successfully around that.
And obviously a lot of technical complexity to that response. If I could summarize, just because your data is in the cloud doesn't make it more or less secure. It's really about the best practices that we've discussed here, which is know what you have, how important is it, how vulnerable are the containers where it lives, and are there other configuration type issues. And so when we think about managing risk, it's really, in my opinion, it's about really figuring out, how do I do the minimum amount necessary to protect my data and my business mission, but no less. And where we struggle is in this, but no less, right? Most organizations are doing less today. And I would argue that the cybersecurity industry has really done MSPs and small businesses no favors, because we love complexity and we like it to be scary and expensive and lots of people making money. But the cloud is an amazing, amazing resource if you leverage it, but it can also lead to heartache if you're not aware of the differences. I've heard this thing, I hear it all the time, where it's just another person's computer, or it's just another computer. That's not true. It is, of course, well, it's partially true. It is someone else's computer, but you should not make assumptions about the security of that computer. And you still own that accountability and liability for ensuring that you've managed that risk, that you're compliant, and others. Moving on to non-technical things, of course, protecting data isn't just about vulnerability management and hardening your assets. Certainly, the human element. We argue that all cybersecurity risk comes down to a human being, but probably not the way you think about it. Yes, people clicking links, opening attachments, visiting infected websites, that continues to challenge and plague us. But keep in mind, if an employee of yours clicks a link that is fraudulent or is about to start a ransomware payload download, what that means is that a whole bunch of technology upstream has already failed. Now, that technology, that code was written by a human, it was deployed by a human, it was configured and maintained by a human. So yes, absolutely, humans are at the core of every cyber risk, but it's not just about people clicking links. So it's really important that training, education, and testing happen across your workforce. No doubt, we want people to make it a point to assess when they're working in email and take the 2.6 seconds that we believe it takes to analyze an email to ensure that it's legitimate. But also, in terms of training, testing, and culture, we want to make sure that the people who are responsible for cybersecurity controls are conscientious, and there's some quality and integrity to that process as well. So there are absolutely non-technical things, from policy to incident response plans to training and testing and educating your people. We can't and shouldn't really rely on vulnerability and configuration management and asset inventories to protect us all. It's right. The defense in depth thing does play here, and it is important to recognize that the cybersecurity is a system, much of which is actually non-technical. And then I have my own answer for this, but I'll let Liam go first.
So it's very open-ended. It depends on which side of the fence you're on, right? So managing risk can be a dual side. One is, if it's data, it actually has to be managed by the data owner, right? From a data perspective, but also from a risk management standpoint, we need to look at cybersecurity departments to manage and maintain the level of risk that's been acceptable, but also engaging with those data owners to make sure that they're managing the risk at a data level perspective. Now, I can talk about vulnerability data, vulnerability side of things, but I'd like to see it from Reg's perspective when looking at it from a SOC standpoint, because we can talk about data all day from a Cyrisma perspective and vulnerabilities at that level, but we want to see it from the other side with Reg talking about from accountability around that.
Yeah, and I think the short answer about accountability is, and who should be accountable is, it's you. Mm-hmm. Period. Hard stop. We are all accountable for managing risk in our organizations, and there's no other way to attack this problem if we don't do this collectively. And I'm not big on fear tactics, but we certainly have seen a single click take down an organization for a week. It's really about developing, some culture. Accountability for the program, however, should be really located with someone who not necessarily is a cybersecurity expert. We know small businesses generally don't have them. Many MSPs don't have them. And so this is really about who's the best protector of the organization, who can manage and track progress, who can hold other people responsible for getting things done on time, and managing the process. That's really what accountability looks like, particularly in smaller organizations where you don't have a chief information security officer or a cybersecurity expert, or maybe even someone in compliance or otherwise. But we're all accountable for risk, and I think that's really an important message, and we should all feel that way. So a few next steps. This is all stuff that you can do today. And should do today. The first is develop an asset inventory. So what do you have and how important it is? It does not need to be fancy. You don't need special software or technologists. Take a spreadsheet, list out your health records, where do you store social security numbers? Where do you process credit card transactions? Where is your intellectual property and trade secrets? Make a list of those things and what it would be worth to protect them or manage the risk around those. And then last, when people ask me, and it's a difficult question, how much should I spend on cybersecurity? There's no right answer. But what what always works is working backwards and answering for yourself, what would it have been worth to have been compliant so I earned that customer, or to have built a program so I could satisfy my supply chain, or renewed my insurance, or kept my board happy. You can very quickly get overwhelmed by budgeting for cybersecurity, primarily because there's no direct correlation between your investment in cybersecurity and the outcomes. If you're doing it well, certainly you can correlate, but it's not like IT. In fact, it's much more like personal fitness, where your input doesn't exactly equate to the output at all times. So really, really important.
I also want to add something to that as well,
sure.
As Reg, is that you've seen the memes going around on the internet, right? Which is actually true. How much do you spend before a breach? Is they always have pennies and so forth in there, compared to what people actually pay after a breach. And it's always the added case where people pay more to reduce risk after a breach and compromise has happened, rather than that's being reactive. But organizations need to be a little proactive in certain areas to make sure that they don't become a statistic and don't have that mindset of spending more money after the fact, when you could actually reduce that risk prior to even happening and be ahead of your market, especially with competitors, that you could be ahead of the game. So you can actually win more business, especially when they're doing vendor risk management and third-party assessments on you as an individual to see if you're worth to invest in as a vendor or partner.
Yeah, I agree. Cybersecurity, I think the word is out. Cybersecurity can be an asset for your business, not just a cost center. It can create competitive advantage. It can help you avoid costs. It can help you stay on budget. And so we need to start thinking about this more from a business perspective and less from a technical. We could do memes all day, which would satisfy me, but I think let's figure out, and I know we've got a cool little thing here. I don't know if Dana, is it working, or I don't want to put you on the spot here, but we can't hear you. Is the wheel of names actually working right now? Yeah, here we go.
It is working. So I've got everybody that attended. We're going to see who wins. Lorraine Smith. So congratulations. Exciting. We appreciate you joining.
Fantastic. All right, Lorraine, we'll get that to you. We'll figure out how to get your address.
We'll send you a note and we'll coordinate with you.
All right, other questions?
So please use the chat, raise your hand, let us know if you have any questions for Liam and Reg. We're here to help. So far, look, guys, you are so comprehensive.
The awkward silence, the inevitable.
Yeah, hold on 1 second. We do have any ideas? Carla said, any ideas on how to make data mapping as easy as possible?
Well, I think for most of us, I think we tend to overcomplicate because we're not sure what's going to be required of us down the road. But I would say, just get started. Again, a simple spreadsheet. When you think about, and hopefully I'm understanding the question, in terms of an asset inventory, can be a simple spreadsheet with a classification. Who is the owner of that data? Like, meaning who's making or ultimately responsible for making cybersecurity decisions about that data asset? Who might a custodian be? So, for example, Amazon or someone else. Just some basic understanding of the data, as well as Liam mentioned, who has access to these things would be certainly a secondary step. But I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, mapping that data onto controls and requirements and the different types of services that you may be engaging in is really, I think, academic, and we tend to overcomplicate it. But I would encourage you to think very simply about it.
I just want to add to that, because we worked with a lot of organizations, and they have similar situations where they're like, okay, if I go and look online, they say they have data mapping saying, okay, public, confidential, private, top secret. And that seems to be kind of like the norm. And it's hard to do that. So what we've come across and said, we tell people is just put it into two buckets: what you deem as sensitive and what you deem as public domain. And that makes it easier, because then once you know what's sensitive, you can put parameters around that once it's being deemed as sensitive. And that can be trade secrets, could be internal initiatives, could be actual information like healthcare on patients, or even from a client perspective. And you deem that as sensitive, you can then build around processes around that. If it's public, then it's public domain. That means, like, people talk about emails and so forth as being public. That can be deemed as sensitive now when you're involved in, like, California and you got constituents or customers there. Then you get into CCPA, the California Consumer Protection Act, or in Europe with GDPR. So you have to crosswalk certain things. But just mapping those things in those sense will make it easier for you to then put also what Reg put into practice as well, than trying to fit a square peg in a round hole when it says, is this confidential, or is it private, or is it top secret? Just make it simple by focusing on sensitive and public.
Yeah, I'd agree. If the question was about data classification, there are several other tricks to expediting that process. And I'll give you one of them. Create a classification called unclassified, so that all of your data inherently and implicitly falls into that classification until you give it a different classification. So what that means from an audit standpoint is all of your data, yes, you've rolled out your entire data classification program, even though 50% of it is labeled as unclassified. There's other tricks too. If classification is, if you got questions, let us know, and we can take that offline and get real deep with it.
And for sure, to get a hold of us, you can go to info@orbitalfire.com. You can call us, and for sure, there's a form on our website, and we can reach out, whether it's Liam or Reg or one of our teams. Okay, any other questions? I don't see any so far. I think we're good. Is there, Reg, anything you want to say in closing?
No, we appreciate everyone's time today. We know that this is not the easiest topic for a Tuesday morning. Hopefully we've simplified that and made it somewhat actionable for you, and given you some things that you can take back to your organization, your MSP, small business today, and see benefit from. Liam, I just want to thank you. Appreciate the time and the partnership. And yeah.
I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.